Today we'll be stepping back a little bit chronologically. Last week we looked at the enemies of Israel, the other nations that they encountered as they entered the promised land. And then afterwards, in the days of the judges, how a lot of those nations were related to the Israelites, the ones that they were told not to exterminate, not to wipe out, whose land they were not given, were the descendants of Esau, or the children of Lot, or even Abraham himself. And those nations keep showing up in the story of Israel as we read the Old Testament. And we got, at least in a cursory way, through the time period of the Judges last week. But today we're going to be going back and getting a head start to help us better understand the transition. And we're going to be looking today and then next week as well, because it was a very important transition in the history of Israel between the time of the judges and the time of the kings. And the key figure in that was a man named Samuel. Samuel was the last judge, and he was also the first prophet in the days of kings and prophets, where the prophets would be there to support a king and bring them messages from God, and to anoint a king's successor. He filled both roles. But today we're going to be looking at the beginning of his story, specifically how it relates to the priesthood of Israel. And the priesthood, it may seem kind of a side story at this time in history, but the further we go, the more prominent and the more important the priesthood becomes, because especially after the Babylonian exile, the priests were the leaders of the country. There was even a point where the high priest was the king. He was called the king. He wore a crown and governed the nation. But let's go back, as I said, in the chronology a little bit earlier than where we were, to Leviticus chapter 8. And take a look from the very beginning at the family of Aaron, the beginning of the priesthood. And we're going to be going a little bit faster through this passage because it's not what we're going to be focusing on this morning, but it's important background, I think. Leviticus 8, starting in verse 31. This is the ordination ceremony for Aaron and his sons. They're coming to the tabernacle, offering sacrifices. Moses has put oil of anointing on them. And they are being confirmed in their office as priests. And Aaron has 4 sons, Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. 2 of those names you won't have to remember for long if you're familiar with the story. Verse 31 says, Then Moses said to Aaron and his sons, Boil the flesh at the doorway of the tent of meeting, and eat it there with the bread which is in the basket of the ordination offering, just as I commanded, saying, Aaron and his sons shall eat it. And the remainder of the flesh and of the bread you shall burn in the fire. And you shall not go outside the doorway of the tent of meeting for 7 days, until the day that the period of your ordination is fulfilled. For he will ordain you through 7 days. So it wasn't just a one-day event, it was a week. They were supposed to stay. It appears the tent of meeting, that's another thing that I shouldn't say without researching it more. because the tent of meeting was also the tent outside where Moses went specifically to meet with God. But it appears contextually that this is the tabernacle being talked about here, because this is where they offer incense, they offer sacrifices, and the glory of God shows up in just a little bit later in this passage. So they stay there for 7 days. They don't go out. Verse 34, Yahweh has commanded to do as has been done this day, to make atonement on your behalf. At the doorway of the tent of meeting, moreover, you shall remain day and night for 7 days, and keep the charge of Yahweh, so that you will not die, for so I have been commanded. Thus Aaron and his sons did all the things which Yahweh had commanded through Moses. Now it happened on the 8th day, after they had been there for a week, that Moses called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. And he said to Aaron, take for yourself a calf, a bull for a sin offering, and a ram for a burnt offering, both without blemish, and bring them near before Yahweh. Then to the sons of Israel you shall speak, saying, take a male goat for a sin offering, and a calf and a lamb, both 1 year old, without blemish, for a burnt offering, and an ox and a ram for a peace offering, to sacrifice before Yahweh, and a grain offering mixed with oil, for today Yahweh will appear to you. So they took what Moses had commanded to the front of the tent of meeting, and the whole congregation came near and stood before Yahweh. And Moses said, this is the thing which Yahweh has commanded you to do, that the glory of Yahweh may appear to you. So they were to follow his instructions, offer these sacrifices. Hi, Mom. Glad you could make it. That's my mom back there. Good to see you. So they did these things in order that God might come to them. They purified themselves. They offered sacrifices for their own sake, for the sakes of the people, so that they would behold the glory of God, so that he would show up in the midst of them. Okay. Verse 7 is where we are. Moses then said to Aaron, come near to the altar and offer your sin offering and your burnt offering, that you may make atonement for yourself and for the people. And we saw that as we were looking at the law and the ways that it was inadequate and foreshadowed the ministry of Christ, the fact that priests had to offer sacrifices for their own sins, as well as the sins of the people. That you may make atonement for them just as Yahweh has commanded. And so it goes into detail about Aaron offering these sacrifices. We're not going to read the whole passage. We're going to skip down to verse 22 of chapter 9. Then Aaron lifted up his hands toward the people and blessed them. And he stepped down after offering the sin offering and the burnt offering and the peace offerings. And Moses and Aaron went into the tent of meeting. Then they came out and blessed the people, and the glory of Yahweh appeared to all the people. Then fire came out from before Yahweh and consumed the burnt offering and the portions of fat on the altar, and all the people saw it and shouted and fell on their faces. So just as God appeared on Mount Sinai in glory, in power, and fire to confirm the ministry of Moses, to confirm the law to the people, he gives this visual demonstration here to confirm the ministry of Aaron, to say, because Aaron has offered these sacrifices, I am accepting these sacrifices. He consumes them with fire, and I am coming to dwell among you. Because of his ministry, I am able to come near to you. And his glory is seen by the people. And it's an awesome experience. Beginning of chapter 10, then Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took their respective fire pans and put fire in them. And they placed incense on the fire, and they offered strange fire before Yahweh, which he had not commanded them. And the emphasis here, I mean, people debate what exactly strange fire means, what they did precisely. The point is that this was something God had not told them to do. They were given very specific instructions about how they were supposed to perform their duties in the tabernacle. This was not part of it. This was something they did impulsively, presumptuously, thinking, we're the priests, we have this right to lead, I guess, in the area of worship, to worship in the way that we feel moved to at this moment. And what was in their hearts, whether it was pride, we don't know, whether it was actual joy and love for God, and it just led them into disobedience. It's not the kind of love that God wants, to attempt things for him without taking him into account, without actually following him, obeying his instructions. Obedience is more important to him than sacrifice, as Saul found out, and as Nadab and Abihu found out, and their family as well. And fire came out. Remember, fire was already there. It was coming out from the glory of the Lord, out of the tent of meeting, consuming the sacrifice. Fire came out from the presence of Yahweh and consumed them as well. And they died before Yahweh. Then Moses said to Aaron, "It is what Yahweh spoke, saying, 'By those who come near me, I will be treated as holy, and before all the people I will be glorified.'" So Aaron kept silent. And Aaron's sons were carried out of the camp. In verse 6, then Moses said to Aaron and to his sons Eleazar and Ithamar, "Do not uncover your heads nor tear your clothes, so that you will not die, and that he will not become wrathful against all of the congregation. But your relatives, the whole house of Israel, shall weep over the burning which Yahweh has brought about. You shall not go out from the doorway of the tent of meeting, lest you die, for the anointing oil of Yahweh is upon you." So they did according to the word of Moses. And this drove home to them in a powerful way their responsibility as the mediators between God and his people, the absolute necessity that they be holy themselves. And we see the other two sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, here and recognize that they are going to be the future of the priesthood. Nadab and Abihu are dead. And it is through Eleazar and Ithamar that the ministry of Aaron will continue into the future. Now, last week, we also looked at an incident that occurred during the wilderness wanderings. So after this, in Numbers 25, remember Balaam, after not being allowed to curse Israel, gave the king of the Moabites wicked advice, told him very shrewdly, very wickedly, but very correctly, the best way to get to the Israelites, the best way to weaken them would be to put them at odds with God, would be to get God to judge them. And so King Balak got the help of the Midianites to seduce the Israelites away from the worship of God and get them to participate in idolatry and sexual immorality with a lot of the people they had just liberated from the Amorites. Yes, the Amorites, the one with the R. But in 25, verse 6, and a little bit, before this, the plague has started as a result of this sin. And Moses and the leaders of Israel are mourning over it and discussing what to do. Then behold, in verse 6, one of the sons of Israel came and brought near to his brothers a Midianite woman in the sight of Moses and in the sight of all the congregation of the sons of Israel, while they were weeping at the doorway of the tent of meeting. So as Moses and the leaders are mourning over the sins of Israel, past them into a man's tent walk an Israelite man and a Midianite woman. And Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, so Aaron's grandson, the son of Eleazar, Phinehas, saw it, and he arose from the midst of the congregation and took a spear in his hand, and he went after the man of Israel into the tent and pierced both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman, through the body. Then the plague on the sons of Israel was checked. The plague stopped. So those who died by the plague were 24,000. Then Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, has turned away my wrath from the sons of Israel, in that he was jealous with my jealousy among them, so that I did not consume the sons of Israel in my jealousy. Therefore say, Behold, I give him my covenant of peace. And it shall be for him and his seed after him a covenant of a perpetual priesthood, because he was jealous for his God and made atonement for the sons of Israel. So, in contrast to Nadab and Abihu, even in the worship of God before the congregation, they demonstrated rebellion. Phinehas, even outside the context of worship, made atonement for the people. He felt what God felt. He acted in defense of God's holiness and came between the destruction that God was inflicting on the Israelites because of their sin and God himself. He made amends as far as he could for their sin. And God approved that he has the heart of a priest. He is doing what a priest ought to do by being a mediator between God and his people, by being a champion of holiness. And as a result, God makes a perpetual covenant with him. The line of Eleazar are God's chosen priests. So remember, we have two sons. We have Eleazar and we have Ithamar. And now God is promising a perpetual priesthood, a never-ending priesthood to the sons of Eleazar through Phinehas. All right? So bear that in mind as we go on. Eli, the end of the time of the judges. Let's go to 1 Samuel. We're doing a lot of just reading and not as much talking about what we're reading today, but it's a lot to get through if we want the whole story here. 1 Samuel 2, and we're going to be starting in verse 12. But Eli, here at the end of the period of Judges, remember they're in the land, they have the tabernacle set up in the, at Shiloh. Shiloh is where it is. It's kind of the center religiously for Israel at this time. And Eli is serving as a priest there, not only as a priest, though, but he is a judge. If you go over to his death in 1 Samuel chapter 4, verse 18, it says at the end of the verse, thus he judged Israel 40 years. The same thing that it says after describing the reign of each individual judge. They judged Israel for this long. And Samuel, as I said, became a judge later. But Eli was a judge. He wasn't only a priest, but he was somebody that the Israelites came to have their disputes settled, to have the law interpreted for them. And it's possible that he even had military influence when he was younger. We're not told that, but that was a common thing for a judge. But Eli also was not a descendant of Eleazar. We saw that the priesthood was promised to the sons of Eleazar. Eli and his family were descendants, at least on their father's side, from Ithamar. Okay? So right away, the promise of God to the line of Eleazar was not fulfilled. But we're going to see it fulfilled in a slow way over many years. Eventually, it's going to happen. It says in verse 12 of 1 Samuel chapter 2, now the sons of Eli were vile men. They did not know Yahweh. And this was the legal judgment for the priests with the people. When any man was offering a sacrifice, the priest's young man would come while the meat was boiling with a three-pronged fork in his hand, and he would thrust it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot. All that the fork would bring up, the priest would take for himself. Thus they would do in Shiloh to all the Israelites who came there. Also, before they offered up the fat in smoke, and that's the key phrase there, before they offered the fat, which we could go to Leviticus and see very clearly. For the sake of time, we won't right now, but the fat belonged to God. They were actually forbidden to eat the fat of the meat. Before they offered up the fat, though, the priest's young man would come and say to the man who was sacrificing, give the priest meat for roasting. He will not take boiled meat from you, only raw. Then the man would say to him, they must surely offer up the fat in smoke first, and then take as much as your soul desires. Then he would say, no, you shall give it now, and if not, I will take it by force. Thus the sin of the young men was very great before Yahweh, for the men spurned the offering of Yahweh, taking what belonged to God for themselves, using their position as priests for their own personal advantage. And as we see the sons of Eli, they are contrasted constantly throughout this passage. We keep going back to Samuel. And consistently negative things are said about Eli's sons, and consistently positive things are said about Samuel. The young boy Samuel grew before Yahweh at the end of verse 21. In verse 22, now Eli was very old, and he heard all that his sons were doing to all Israel, and how they lay with the women who served at the doorway of the tent of meeting. So Eli said to them, why do you do such things, the evil things that I hear from all these people? No, my sons, for the report is not good, which I hear the people of Yahweh passing about. If one man sins against another, God will mediate for him. Remember, that was part of the ministry of the priesthood. They were to go between people who had sinned and God. But if a man sins against Yahweh, who can pray for him? So not only, since they're priests, remember, I mean, if somebody might sin against God in another context, a priest might be that mediator. But if the priests themselves, we could add to what Eli is saying here, sin against God, who is going to mediate for them? And remember, they're stealing from God directly. And this concerns Eli very much. But they would not listen to the voice of their father, for Yahweh desired to put them to death. He had already decided what he was going to do. Now the young boy, Samuel, was growing in stature and in favor with both Yahweh and with men. We could talk for a good time probably about the parallels between Samuel and Christ. Maybe we'll look at that more next week if we have time. This, of course, is very similar to what it says about Jesus in Luke, that he grew in wisdom, stature, and in favor with God and men. Like Jesus, Samuel was not a Levite, but he was chosen by God to be a priest when the sons of Aaron failed in their responsibility. Okay, so because of this sin that his sons are committing, a man of God came and brought a message to Eli. We know from further down, the word of God was rare in these days. There weren't prophets all over the place like there were at some point during the reign of kings. But there was a man of God who came to Eli and said to him, "Thus says Yahweh, did I not indeed reveal myself to the house of your father when they were in Egypt, enslaved to Pharaoh's house? And did I not choose them from all the tribes of Israel to be my priests, to go up to my altar, to burn incense, to carry an ephod before me? And did I not give to the house of your father all the fire offerings of the sons of Israel? Why do you kick at my sacrifice and at my offering, which I have commanded in my habitation, and honor your sons above me by making yourselves fat with the choicest of every offering of my people Israel?" Eli did not participate directly in the sins of his sons. He did not treat the Israelites in this way when they came to worship. But what did Eli do? He ate the fat portions that his sons brought to him. He benefited from their greed. And when we see him die later, when he falls back off his chair and breaks his neck after hearing the news that the Ark of God has been captured, the author of 1 Samuel makes a note that he was a large man, a heavy man who had gotten fat off of the sacrifices of the people. In 3:13, God shows up to Samuel. We remember he calls Samuel by night and he gives him the message that this prophecy is going to come about very soon, that Hophni and Phinehas are going to die. And the house of Eli is going to suffer as a result of their sin. And in verse 13, God says to Samuel, "I have told him that I am about to judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knew, which Eli knew about, because his sons have been bringing a curse on themselves, but he did not rebuke them." And this is interesting that God would say this, because we see Eli seem to rebuke his sons, in verses 23 through 25 of chapter 2, when he says, "Why do you do such things? The evil I hear from all these people." Why didn't God consider Eli's words a legitimate rebuke? What does God mean when he says that Eli did not rebuke his sons? I think it has a lot to do with follow through. He could have stopped them. He had the authority to stop them. The point is that he loved his sons more than he loved God. He knew that they deserved to be removed from the priesthood. Actually, because of what they did, they deserved to die. But he chose them over the Lord. And as a result, brought destruction to his house. Verse 30 of chapter 2. This is what the man of God said. "Therefore, Yahweh, the God of Israel, declares, I did indeed say that your house and the house of your father would walk before me forever. But now, Yahweh declares, far be it from me. For those who honor me, I will honor, and those who despise me will be cursed. Behold, the days are coming, and I will break your strength and the strength of your father's house, so that there will not be an old man in your house. And you will look upon the distress of my habitation, in spite of all the good that I do for Israel. And an old man will not be in your house all the days. Yet I will not cut off every man of yours from my altar, so that your eyes will fail from weeping, and your soul grieve, and all the increase of your house will be put to death in the prime of life. Now this will be a sign to you, which will come concerning your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas. On the same day, both of them will be put to death." And we saw this happen later. If you're familiar again with what happened, the Israelites fought the Philistines. They said, "We will have success if the ark of God is with us. Let's have the priests bring the ark." And because they did that, Hophni and Phinehas were killed. The ark of God was captured by the Philistines. And that was the sign that this would take place. But it was fulfilled in even more dramatic fashion later in 1 Samuel 22. And we are skipping ahead in the story. We're going to come back. But in chapter 22, King Saul is pursuing David. And it's not common knowledge yet that they're at odds, that Saul is trying to catch David. And so David gets help from the priests in the town of Nob. And the king said to the guards who were standing by him in verse 17, "Turn around and put the priests of Yahweh to death, because their hand also is with David, and because they knew that he was fleeing and did not reveal it in my ears." But the servants of the king were not willing to put forth their hands to fall upon the priests of Yahweh. Then the king said to Doeg, the Edomite, the one who brought him the news that the priests had supported David, given him food. The king said to Doeg, "Turn around and attack the priests." And Doeg the Edomite turned around and attacked the priests. And he put to death that day 85 men who wore the linen ephod. So he struck Nob, the city of the priests, with the edge of the sword. both men and women, infants and nursing babies, also oxen, donkeys, and sheep, he struck with the edge of the sword. But one son of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled to David. And these were the children of Ithamar. This was Eli's family. But there was one survivor, Abiathar, who escaped and fled after David. And Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priests of Yahweh. Then David said to Abiathar, I knew on that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul, it is I who have turned against every person in your father's household. Stay with me. Do not be afraid, for he who seeks my life seeks your life, for you are safe with me. And Abiathar stayed with David and became his priest. And even after David became king, Abiathar was David's high priest. But this was part of the fulfillment of God's promise to Eli when he told him that his house would be put to death in the prime of life. But the last thing that God told Eli through this man of God, in verse 35 of 1 Samuel chapter 2, but I will raise up for myself a faithful priest who will do according to what is in my heart and in my soul. And I will build him a faithful house, and he will walk before my anointed, before my Messiah, always. And it will be that everyone who is left in your house will come and bow down to him for a piece of silver or a loaf of bread, and say, please assign me to one of the priest's offices, so that I may eat a piece of bread. So he's going to take the office of priesthood away from the house of Eli and give it to, we're going to see, the children of Eleazar and Phinehas, the ones to whom he had promised it long ago. And we know, of course, as I've already mentioned, the death of Hophni and Phinehas in battle, the capturing of the Ark of God. And even after the Philistines returned the Ark, it was not returned to the tabernacle. It was put in the house of someone named Abinadab, and he took care of it, he and his sons, until the day that David brought it to Jerusalem. They were in charge of it. And it brought about this time of religious, I don't know the right word for it, but there wasn't a strong religious center as far as a place. The religious center of Israel was actually a man, Samuel. Where he went, that is where you went to legitimately worship. He offered sacrifices, he taught the people, he brought them the word of God. And he used the high places, actually, which they weren't supposed to use later. He offered sacrifices on the high places. And the important question was not where you were, but who was doing it. Was it the person God had chosen? And I personally believe that it looked forward to the period of time when Jesus said, you will not any longer worship on Mount Gerizim or in Jerusalem. You'll worship in spirit and in truth. It is through him. It is not where we are, but it is through whom do we worship, through whom do we approach God. But that was only a brief time in the history of Israel before the ark was brought to Jerusalem and the proper worship of God in the tabernacle was resumed. And under David, we're going to leave 1 Samuel behind for this morning. And see how this played out, the end of the story. First Chronicles 24 talks about how things were organized under David, how he organized the priesthood. Now the divisions of the sons of Aaron were these. The sons of Aaron were Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. But Nadab and Abihu died before their father and had no sons. So Eleazar and Ithamar ministered as priests. And David, with Zadok of the sons of Eleazar, and Ahimelech, the survivor of Nob, the one who went to join him in the wilderness, with those two, divided them according to their assignments for their service. So there were two main priests. There was Zadok, who was descended from Eleazar, and there was Ahimelech, who was descended from Ithamar. Trying to keep the names straight here. And more chief men were found from the sons of Eleazar than the sons of Ithamar. So they divided them thus. There were 16 heads of fathers' households of the sons of Eleazar, and 8 of the sons of Ithamar, according to their father's household. So even at this point, the house of Ithamar was smaller, half the size, only half the number of leaders were found. And so the house of Eleazar, to whom God had promised the priesthood, remember, was the stronger of the two. Then something happened to solidify their position. Even further on, at the end of David's reign, in 1 Kings, I'm going the wrong way because I'm in Chronicles. Kings is back this way. In 1 Kings 1, and we'll try to get through this quickly here. Verses 5 through 8. Now Adonijah, the son of Haggith, that's one of David's wives, so Adonijah, David's son, exalted himself, saying, I will be king, when his father got sick and old and was about to die. So he prepared for himself a chariot and horsemen and 50 men as runners before him. But his father had never grieved him at any time by asking, Why have you done so? So David had been a neglectful father. He had not rebuked his son for the things he did. Had a lot of the same failings as Eli. And to make a long story short, Adonijah conspired. Verse 7, he conferred with Joab and Abiathar, the priest, and they followed Adonijah and supported him as king. So Abiathar supported the illegitimate king, the king that David had not chosen. And because of that decision, when Solomon was declared king, he banished Abiathar from being priest in 2 Kings 2:26. Then to Abiathar the priest, Solomon said, Go to Anathoth, to your own field, for you deserve to die, but I will not put you to death at this time, because you carried the ark of of Lord Yahweh before my father David, and because you were afflicted in everything with which my father was afflicted. So Solomon drove Abiathar away from being priest to Yahweh, in order to fulfill the word of Yahweh, which he had spoken concerning the house of Eli in Shiloh. So through all of these events, this slow process, many, many years later, the priesthood is taken away from the house of Ithamar and given to the house of Eleazar and Phinehas and then Zadok. And it is the descendants of Zadok from that point on who are the high priests of Israel. Ezra was a descendant of Zadok. If you go to Ezra chapter 7 and read his family tree, Eleazar, Phinehas, and Zadok are all there. He's in the line of priests. And where I want to end this morning is in Ezekiel. Faithfulness and unfaithfulness to God have far-reaching consequences. Ezekiel 44:15. But the Levitical priests, the sons of Zadok, who kept the responsibility of my sanctuary when the sons of Israel went astray from me, shall come near to me to minister to me, and they shall stand before me to bring near to me the fat and the blood, declares Lord Yahweh. They shall enter my sanctuary. They shall come near to my table to minister to me and keep the responsibility given by me. And this is talking about the coming temple, and the coming ministry of that temple will belong to the sons of Zadok. The promises of God may be very slow. He may be talking about something that will happen years in the future when we first hear the promise. And it may seem like he is being unfaithful, but ultimately, he is in control and will bring it to fruition. And we should take to heart very much the holiness required of the priesthood. We are a holy nation and a priesthood for this world. People ought to look at us and see the holiness of God. We are to go between God and a rebellious people and show them what he is like. Embrace the ministry of reconciliation to bring them back to him. And we cannot do that without holiness, without purity, and without faith in his promises. Let's close